The Jedi Council had every reason to fear Anakin Skywalker's second lightsaber, and it had nothing to do with the color of its blade. Most fans remember this iconic saber as a symbol of heroism, the weapon carried by the Chosen One through the Clone Wars. But the truth is that this single creation told the story of its builder's fall long before he ever turned on the Order. Using 5 distinct canon and legend sources, we found 5 clear reasons why the senior masters had cause to fear this one weapon, from the way it was built, to the way it was swung, to the way it reshaped a student, to the terrible role it played on the Order's final night. This is the full story of why one saber became the greatest institutional threat the tradition had ever faced. Not because of its power alone, but because of what it revealed about the man carrying it, and what the Order could not bring itself to do about either one. Chapter 1: Doctrinal Deviation. The Order taught that every lightsaber should reflect the 3 pillars: the Force, knowledge, and self-discipline. The Jedi Path presents construction as a defining step in a student's journey, one involving discipline, meditation, and precise Force alignment. The training manual frames this process as a test of character as much as craftsmanship. The resulting weapon is meant to embody the values that years of study have taught. The emphasis on self-discipline and warnings against passion showed that every component was supposed to serve control, not aggression. When a student builds the instrument correctly, it channels calm focus. When it builds wrong, the saber announces it. And by every measure the Order had, Anakin Skywalker's second saber was built wrong. The man who assembled it was not the same person who had built his first blade. As chronicled in the novelization of Attack of the Clones, his first saber was destroyed on Geonosis, and by the time he needed a replacement, he had already crossed lines the Order never knew about. A forbidden attachment, a slaughter born from grief, a duel with Count Dooku that cost him his arm and nearly his life. The boy who built the first blade had been full of potential. The young man who now needed to build again was haunted by death, marked by violence, and secretly married to a senator. The reference guide describes his second saber as a solidly constructed silver alloy cylinder. Externally, it looked like a well-crafted instrument of the Order. Internally, it told a different story. The saber was specifically set to deliver maximum power. This was not a device designed for careful defenses or measured strikes. It was engineered to overwhelm an opponent through sheer force, to end fights quickly through raw output rather than patient technique. That adjustment was not an accident, it was an engineering preference. The Jedi Path details how the 3 pillars should be embedded in every component of the construction itself. A properly made instrument channels the Force in harmony with its maker's calm focus. By tuning his new saber for raw output, the builder was telling anyone who paid close attention exactly what he valued: dominance over discipline, strength over patience. The construction process that the Order built as a mirror of inner growth had instead become a mirror of inner damage. The saber did not lie. The governing body simply chose not to read it. The saber was not just a weapon, it was a declaration, and the declaration contradicted the Order's foundation. But a declaration alone can be ignored until the battlefield starts proving it right. Chapter 2: Aggression Rewarded. A weapon designed for overwhelming output is a concern. A weapon built for peak output in the hands of someone who fights like the Chosen One is something else entirely. The Lightsaber collection records that even as a Padawan, Skywalker's fighting style revealed his darker impulses. His entire approach was based on aggression rather than defense. Instead of purely defensive posture the Order encouraged, he relied on aggressive thrusts and big, powerful swings. Every exchange was meant to put his opponent on the back foot, to dominate rather than deflect. Where other knights sought to control the pace of a fight through patience, the Chosen One sought to end it through pressure. The novel makes clear why this mattered to the governing body. The manual covers the different combat forms available to students. In each one, from the basic movements taught to initiates to the advanced techniques studied by knights and masters, was built on a foundation of discipline and emotional control. A weapon is supposed to be an extension of the Force itself. Guided by calm awareness, rather than raw emotion. The philosophy behind every stance and every movement was rooted in the idea that a true guardian fights to protect, not destroy. Skywalker was not just fighting aggressively, he was winning aggressively. His movements were driven by feeling, by intensity, by a desire to overpower whoever stood across from him. Where the established forms taught students to read an opponent and respond with the minimum necessary strength, he attacked with the maximum power available. The saber, tuned for overwhelming output, was the perfect match for a fighter who swung with maximum force. The tool and the technique reinforced each other in a cycle that grew stronger with every engagement, creating a combat approach that looked less like the Order's traditions and more like something from the opposite side of the Force. And the battlefield kept rewarding it. The Chosen One was effective, his mission succeeded, the enemies he faced fell. Every successful engagement made it harder for the Order's leadership to argue that his approach was wrong, because the results said otherwise. The tradition had spent centuries teaching that self-control leads to victory, yet he was proving one fight at a time that overwhelming power worked just as well. That contradiction was not just uncomfortable, it was corrosive. If anger wins as reliably as discipline, then the entire philosophical foundation of combat training comes into question. A flawed technique can be corrected. A technique that keeps winning rewrites the rules. And the Council had no answer for a doctrine being disproven on the battlefield, especially when the weapon doing the disproving was built to be unmatched. Chapter 3: Uncontainable Power. An unpredictable student is manageable. The senior masters had dealt with troubled individuals before. The Order's history was full of those who had brushed the shadow side and been guided back through discipline and mentorship. An unstable student with elite level ability is not. Stunt coordinator Nick Gillard, who designed the fight choreography for the prequel films, rated Skywalker's skill at a level 9. As noted in the reference guide, this placed him on the exact same tier as Master Yoda and Mace Windu, two of the most powerful duelists the Order had ever produced. Yoda's command of the Force and of combat technique was the product of centuries of experience. Windu had developed his own technique form specifically to channel the pull of darkness without giving into it, a technique so difficult that he was the only practitioner who had ever mastered it fully. Skywalker stood beside them as one of the absolute best the Order had. That meant the aggressive fighter the governing body was watching could not be outmatched in a duel, cannot be physically corrected, and cannot be stopped by force if the situation ever demanded it. The senior masters could see the aggression in his technique. They could sense the emotional turbulence behind his strikes, but they also knew that in pure combat ability, he was their equal. The Order had produced exactly what its system was designed to produce, a warrior of extraordinary ability, and then watched as that warrior developed in a direction the system had no mechanism to control. The Order's entire structure assumed that the strongest members were also the most disciplined. Every layer of the system, from initiate training through the trials to the rank of master, was designed to ensure that skill and self-control grew together. When they did not, the system had no backup plan. There was no protocol for a knight who can match the greatest living duelist, but who swung with the emotional wildness of someone the tradition had failed to contain. The governing body could watch and worry, but they could not physically step in if the moment ever came when watching and worrying were no longer enough. The Order had trained a warrior it cannot physically control, and a threat that cannot be contained does not stay individual for long. Not when the Order's own training system gives it a path to spread. Chapter 4: Corruption Spreads. If the aggressive combat style had stayed with one knight, the Order's leadership might have treated it as an individual failing, something to monitor closely, but not to truly fear. A single flawed practitioner, even a gifted one, could be watched and kept away from the most sensitive assignments. Instead, the aggression reproduced. In the same reference guide, the development of Ahsoka Tano is directly tied to her master's influence. When the young Togruta Padawan began using two blades, adding a shorter second blade known as a Shoto, the choice was not simply tactical. The lightsaber collection explains that the addition of this second blade was intended to show that her master's aggressive tactics were shaping her growth as a warrior. She was learning to fight the way he fought, forward, fast, and overwhelming. The Shoto gave her a secondary offensive option that matched his preference for constant pressure. Where the Order's training was supposed to teach patience and self-discipline, she was absorbing a completely different set of values from her master on the battlefield every single day. The connection went deeper than technique. The same source reveals that Ahsoka's original sabers featured an upper portion that was a mirrored version of her teacher's own design. She was carrying a physical echo of his identity in her hands every time she ignited her blades. The tools she assembled were shaped deliberately in his image, the direct result of a training bond that transmitted the master's philosophy into the student's construction. The Jedi Path describes the bond between a teacher and a Padawan as one of the most important relationships in the entire tradition. The manual outlines how a student progresses from initiate through the trials and eventually to the rank of knight, guided at every stage by the example and wisdom of their assigned master. The entire system was designed to pass down core values across generations. Self-control, selflessness, and devotion to the Force were meant to flow naturally from teacher to student, ensuring that each new generation upheld the same principles as the one before. Instead, what flowed from Skywalker to Ahsoka was something the system was never built to handle: his aggression, his preference for offense over defense, his emotional intensity in combat. All of it passed through the training bond and took root in a promising young student. The saber tuned for overwhelming pressure had become the template for a second pair of blades. The governing body was no longer watching one unstable knight with troubling techniques. They were watching that instability reproduce itself in the next generation through the exact channels the Order had built for passing down wisdom. A single unstable knight is a risk, a philosophy passed to the next generation is a structural threat, and the Council knew the difference because everything they feared was about to be proven right. Chapter 5: Fear Proven Right. Everything the governing body feared about this weapon, this fighter, and this path materialized when the Republic fell. The novelization of Revenge of the Sith provides a devastating account of Skywalker's final turn. The fall did not happen all at once. It built steadily through manipulation, fear, and the slow collapse of every relationship he depended on. His attachment to Padme, the one secret the Order never fully uncovered, became the lever that pulled him over the edge. Every crack that had been forming since Tatooine, since Geonosis, since every mission where his aggression went unchecked, was exploited by the Dark Order until there was nothing left to hold. During his first hours as a Sith Lord, Skywalker still carried the same blue-bladed saber he had built during the Clone Wars. He had not yet constructed a red-bladed replacement. He had not yet fully become Darth Vader in name or appearance. He was operating in the space between identities of a fallen knight carrying the tool of his former life. As recorded in the novel, the fallen knight used that alloy cylinder, the one constructed for maximum power, to end younglings inside the temple itself. Children who had been training to become guardians of peace, who had been studying the same pillars and the same forms outlined in the training manuals, were struck down as clone troops simultaneously swept through the halls. They were students, some of them years away from even beginning their trials, and the blade that killed their defenders had been built by a man who had once been one of them, who had once walked those same temple halls as a boy with nothing but hope and raw talent. Order 66 was happening across the galaxy at the same moment. Thousands of Guardians who had served the Republic for years were cut down by the troops they had led into battle. The institution the young knight had served his entire life crumbled around him as he became the very thing those institutions had always warned against. The weapon built for dominance had turned against the institution that built the man who held it. After his defeat on Mustafar, Obi-Wan picked up the fallen saber and carried it away from the volcanic shore. The blue-bladed instrument that had once belonged to one of the Order's most gifted members was lost to its maker forever. The bond between builder and weapon was broken. But even in separation, its influence was not finished. The reference guide reveals that when the newly christened Darth Vader eventually designed a replacement, the result maintained clear design similarities to his old work. The raised hand grip edges and the solid metallic alloy construction carried directly into the Dark Lord's new blade. Even across the boundary between light and dark, between Jedi and Sith, the influence of that familiar cylinder persisted. The Council did not misread the danger, they misjudged their willingness to act. Obi-Wan carried that blade into exile on Tatooine, keeping it hidden for nearly 2 decades in the sands of a desert world far from the galaxy's attention. When he finally handed it to a young farm boy named Luke, the saber began an entirely new chapter, one that the Order's fallen masters never lived to see. Skywalker's second weapon was dangerous enough to help destroy an entire tradition, but it was far from the only one with that kind of reach. Across thousands of years of galactic history, 25 creations proved themselves even more devastating, and we ranked every single one of them. And long before any of those blades existed, the ancient Sith refused to carry them at all, choosing instead a completely different set of tools to fight their wars, for reasons that say everything about how the dark side once operated.